In November 2021, the World Championship match between Jan Nepomniachtchi and Magnus Carlsen took place in the city of Dubai. Now, almost 1.5 years later, the two same players are meeting each other again in the Global Chess League. In fact, they met already on day one when Magnus played with the white pieces, really didn't get anywhere, and the players agreed to a draw. Relatively boring game, so that's why I didn't cover it, but today, on day 5 of the Global Chess League, Jan Nepomniachtchi playing with the white pieces against Magnus Carlsen, and I'm sure you will be treated very well. So let's have a look at this game. Make sure to subscribe to the channel and enjoy the beauty of our game. Jan Nepomniachtchi opens here with 1e4, and Magnus wants to play aggressively, plays the move c5, the Sicilian defense, and we are getting a really sharp, interesting battle. c3, it's the Alapin variation, and black has different ways of meeting this move. Plays here the move e5, aiming for a fight over the control in the center, particularly the d4 square. Knight f3, knight c6. This is a modern way of playing against the Alapin. There are different ways of playing. The move d4 can be played, but then a lot of pawns are going to be exchanged. Instead, Nepo goes for the more ambitious move bishop to c4. And look now, knight f6. This looks like it's a hybrid system of an Italian opening arising from the moves 1e4, 1e5, and including the moves c3 and c5. White plays the move knight g5, and this really looks like the two knights variation, with a big difference that there is a pawn on c5 and a pawn on c3. White is attacking the pawn on f7. Black doesn't have much of a choice, goes for the move d5. E takes d5, knight takes d5. Black has managed to solve the problems for the moment and is attacking the knight on g5. There are different ways of playing here. In the game, Nepo played the move d4, opening up the center as quickly as he can, trying to take advantage of a small lead in development. Should be mentioned though that queen h5, threatening checkmate, is also a critical move. But in that case, there's g6, stopping the mating threat, queen f3, renewing the mating threat, and attacking the knight on d5. After queen takes g5, bishop takes d5. Looks as if black is in trouble, but thanks to the move knight to d8, taking away the pressure against the knight on c6 and protecting the pawn on f7, that knight is temporarily misplaced, but soon after black is able to go bishop g7 and castling kingside, its position is still okay. Back to the game. But this is very important theoretically relevant information. So if you ever try this out, this is something you have to know yourself. Instead, let's have a look. d4 on the board, and black captures the pawn. Of course, the knight on g5 couldn't be taken as the bishop protects it. Queen to b3, increasing the pressure against the knight on d5. And now the knight really doesn't want to go away, because then the pawn on f7 will be taken. So therefore, sort of only move is bishop e6. The bishop supports the knight on d5 one more time, but it does allow knight takes e6, capturing with a knight the bishop. F takes e6, and these pawns, they don't look really nice. Queen takes b7, attacking that knight on c6. Rook c8, rook protects the knight, and white castles. Interesting moment, because I believe that both players were still sort of familiar with this kind of new opening theory. Hasn't been seen in top level chess, but in a few correspondence and engine games this has been tested. I think something like bishop e7 followed by castling kingside is the most natural way of playing. But Magnus Carlsen, he offers the exchange of queens with the move queen d7. He's ready to swap the queens so that the king is in the center, and then we'll try to complete its development very soon anyway. White, for the moment, is not going to cooperate. Drops back with the queen to b5. Bishop e7 played, and now bishop b3. Now you're thinking, why bishop b3? I think the main point is that the bishop was not doing too well on c4, standing in the line of the rook, and after castling kingside, the queen comes back to d3. The queen and bishop have done their job on that side of the board, and white is about to consolidate its position. Brings the queen back to d3, knight a5, attacking the bishop. And now the most logical move would be bishop c2. Was not played in the game, but why not? Bishop c2 with the idea to attack the pawn on h7. Black will play g6, and well, the game goes on. I think it's an interesting position with a lot of play, and it should be noted that c takes d4 is actually a big blunder because of knight b4, losing a piece. Anyway, Nepo had a totally different plan. He dropped back with his bishop to d1. Why would he voluntarily go back with the bishop to that square? Well, he really wants to get the bishop to f3 so that it guards its king's position and gains control over the light squares, and in particular the e4 square. A lot of interesting ideas here, and difficult to say what is exactly the best. Rook fd8 looks like a very sensible way of centralizing the rooks. However, also another move like a knight b7 with the idea to get a knight over to c5. It's something the engine does like quite a lot, because if you look at the position, the knight on a5 itself, it's not too great. Rook fd8, let's see what happened in the game. Big question, of course, is also how is white going to solve its developing issues, because these pieces are still on their initial squares, but once they are able to join the action, the bishop pair of white may become an asset at some point. Bishop f3 was played. To be honest, I think bishop f3 is not the best move. Maybe Nepo should have played more ambitiously with the move queen h3, preparing to come with the bishop to g4, attacking the pawn on e6. It seems to me that in this way you're able to exert more pressure on black's position. As now the rook has left the f-file, black's pieces are way on the other side of the board, not able to help out on the king side. Anyway, it's very complicated position. Bishop f3 was played, and I think Magnus was quite relieved to see this move, because now he decided to take on c3. Knight takes c3, knight takes c3. So the queens are coming off the board. First, queen takes d7, rook takes d7, b takes c3, rook takes c3. Black is a pawn up in this endgame, but the double pawns, they are not looking too great. Bishop b2, attacking the rook. If the rook goes away, the pawn on e5 may be hanging, so rook c5 keeps the pawn protected. And now white played here the move rook ad1. I think there are various moves. We can go into detail, maybe something like bishop to g4, attacking the pawn weaknesses. For instance, if you do that, black will protect it with king f7, and now f4 may look anti-positional to trade off the double pawn on the e-file, but white is looking for active play with its pieces, and I think that's definitely a very interesting attempt. Let's have a look what happened. Rook ad1. Rooks are coming off the board, and now the knight comes into play again, hitting the bishop on b2, bishop c3. And now interesting tactical idea. e4, sacrificing the pawn, hitting the bishop, and of course if you would take, the idea is there is knight d6 with an attack on both the bishops, so white is going to lose material in that case. So of course Nepo doesn't fall for such cheapos, plays the move bishop d4, hitting the rook. Look, wait a second, you can take the bishop on f3, and then the rook is taken, bishop takes c5, two pieces against the rook, but the rook is stronger as it sets up a skewer along the c-file, and that means black is gonna lose material. So both sides are playing for cheapos. Now Magnus, it's his turn not to fall for it. He goes rook a5, moves the rook away, hits the pawn, and after bishop takes e4, now it's rook takes e2, rook takes a2. And now I think in a way this is a small success. I believe that now black has an outside passed pawn, and getting rid of one weak pawn in the center definitely improves the winning chances for black. But still, it's a long way to go, and the pawn on the a-file is not queening any time soon. White starts with g3 so that there are never any back rank issues. The king can move to g2 anytime. Knight d2, attacking the bishop. Bishop goes to c6. Black plays a5, king g2, and the bishop is on c6 to meet a move like a4 with bishop takes a4, trying to deflect the rook, as it has the double function of supporting the pawn as well as supporting the knight on d2. Therefore, black has to be patient, should not rush with the a-pawn. Played king f7, good move, centralizing the king. Bishop c3, attacking the knight. And now a big question is, what are you going to do with the knight? I think Magnus goes for a good move. My first thought was not to play knight c4. Magnus, his idea. Very interesting move. I thought he would play bishop b4 with the idea to exchange his bishop. But after rook takes d2, pieces are getting swapped. And in this endgame with opposite colored bishops, the winning chances are close to 0. Because the bishops are unable to challenge each other and white is a master of the light squares. And with the help of the king and bishop, the a-pawn can just be neutralized. This should be a dead draw despite the extra pawn. So Magnus decides to keep the knight on the board. Very important practical try with very concrete threat of playing knight e3, setting up a fork as the pawn on f2 is pinned. Therefore rook d7, the rook comes in, knight e3 check anyway, king f3, and now the move, rook a3, setting up some pressure along the third rank. Bishop went to b2, and now rook to b3, attacking the bishop. If the bishop will move, there will probably follow some sort of discovered attack. Therefore, f takes e3 played, and now rook takes b2. Now we have the same endgame with opposite colored bishops, but rooks are still on the board. And that's going to be a different story. Pawn on h2 is hanging. It's under threat. And white could move it away. And probably there are reasonable drawing chances in this endgame as well. But he decided to go rook a7, trading off the h-pawn for the passed pawn. And the question is, does black have any serious winning chances? Let's have a look. h5, bringing up the pawn, rook a6, bishop d6. Bishop looks quite nicely placed with a plan of targeting the pawn on g3 together with the rook. Now, I think something like bishop e8 could have been considered with a discovered attack. If you go king takes e8, rook takes d6, this endgame, you can play on forever, but it should probably just be a draw. Anyway, interestingly, Nepo played here the move bishop b5, just setting up a single threat against the bishop, king to e7. And now, what should be the defensive strategy? I think the bishop and rook should try to work together against the king. And you can play here rook a7, which was not played, but let me show you what may happen in that case. King f6, bishop e8, with the idea of going rook f7, starting some counterplay against the king and the remaining pawns. If g5, maybe even king e4. So the king can even join the attack as well, with plans of going rook f7 next. I think white is absolutely okay here. Instead, bishop c4 was played, which is understandable because the bishop on d6 cannot really move away, as the pawn on e6 will be hanging. But look what was missed. g5. Now the g-pawn comes into action. And that's very important because you want to go g4 and force the king to leave the protection of the pawn on g3. Now if you try to swap the pawns by playing g4 yourself, it's h takes g4, and now king takes is not recommendable because of rook h4 and the bishop is simply hanging. Therefore, instead, white went for the move e4. Tricky move, and Magnus plays here rook c2. Excellent idea, attacking the bishop. The bishop doesn't have that many great squares to go to, as you would like to keep the bishop on this diagonal so to maintain some pressure against the pawn on e6. But if you go bishop b3, it's rook c3 with a double attack. And also in case of bishop d3, there will follow rook c3 with a skewer. And after king e3, bishop takes g3, and that's pawn number 2. Therefore, bishop a2 was played. And now the big moment, because it's a mystery, it remains a mystery to me, why Magnus went for a very passive move, rook c5, trying to gain control over the 5th rank. But let's take it back. He could have played here more ambitiously, hitting the king with the move bishop c5, setting up the mating threat with rook f2. And if rook takes e6, you just go king f8. The checks are over. Bishop is also hanging now. Rook f2 is in the air. So rook takes e6 doesn't really help. The rook should stay on the a file to keep the bishop supported. What else to do against the mating threat? If you go g4, then h4. And look at this pawn. It's just unstoppable. This is a very interesting mating attack with very limited material left on the board. But so typical for rook endgames with opposite colored bishops. Let's have a look. Rook c5 played in the game. And now black is still about to go g4 very soon. But king e3 played. And still g4, I believe, fixing the pawn is, technically speaking, a very good move. But instead there followed h4. Trying to create a passed pawn. G takes h4, G takes h4, rook a7 check. King f6, rook h7. The rook gets behind the passed pawn. And now it's a big moment. Magnus played here h3, which is a serious mistake. Because we should understand that in this endgame, if white is able to give up its bishop for the two remaining pawns, you get an endgame of bishop and rook versus rook. And that's theoretically speaking a draw. In a rapid game, anything can happen. Many strong players have lost that endgame. But black should have started here with rook c3. That's the killer move. It's a check. First of all, the king cannot go to d4 because of bishop e5 with a beautiful checkmating pattern. King got to go back to d2. And then it's bishop to b4, setting up a huge potential discovered check against the king. King got to go to d1. And now h3. This pawn is too strong, receives the support, and black should be winning. But Magnus played h3 here first, and now both players missed this move. Bishop takes e6. Incredible, because after king takes e6, looks as if you cannot take the pawn on h3. There is rook c3, and you win the rook with the skewer. But an incredible resource is, rather than taking the pawn on h3, is to play the move king d4 first, to anticipate that skewer. And whatever black does, you can capture the pawn or even give a check first. The pawn on h3 cannot be saved, so you end up in this theoretical endgame, which is a draw. Missed by both players. Instead, king d4 on the board, rook c2, attacking the bishop, and now bishop takes e6 was played. Because you don't really want to move the bishop away and allow black to play the move h2. So bishop takes e6. If you take with the king, rook takes h3, it's the draw again. But the key move is to start here with bishop e5 check. Very important. If the king goes back to d3, there is rook c3 check, king d2, king takes e6, everything is under control. The rook protects the pawn and that's winning. So after bishop e5, king d5 was played, rook d2, king c6, still. If you take the bishop, there is rook takes h3. But now h2. Both sides have a rook, bishop and pawn only. Is this dangerous? Yes, because black is about to take the bishop or play rook d1 followed by h1 queen. So bishop g4 played. Bishop covers the square on d1 and is about to come to f3 to guard the h1 square. So rook f2, rook h3. Very important moment. Can you go rook f1 here to prepare this move? Not at all, because there is rook f3 check, forcing the exchange of rooks. And this endgame is a draw, because the bishop controls the h1 square and you can no longer win as black. So instead, king g5 was played. That's an excellent move. If the bishop goes away, now it's time for rook f1 and the h-pawn is unstoppable. That's game over. So the bishop got to go to f3 to gain control over the h1 square. Rook and bishop are working nicely in defense, but there is this move. Rook takes f3, eliminating the defender. Rook takes f3, h1 queen. Looks as if it's game over. The game continues. Rook f5 check. With the idea to get a bishop and get an endgame of rook and pawn versus queen, which is winning. But Magnus made it very difficult for himself by going with its king to g4. Much easier is to try to get the king in front of the pawn, so that you're attacking the rook. If the rook goes away, king e6, and very soon the pawn will be taken. Now, in the game, there followed king g4, rook takes e5, and it took a really long time to win that pawn on e4. But it's still winning. Magnus was probably confident that it's winning for sure. So he makes a number of moves, tries to get his opponent into zugzwang with a number of checks. King c5, the king also got to make sure that the rook will never be hanging. The rook got to stay on the e-file. And if white ever is going to push the pawn to e5, there is king e4, and the rook does get less squares. With ideas like king f5, you're able to win the pawn very soon. Instead, there followed king c6, queen a5, king d6, king d4. So the king comes around, and for instance, if you push the pawn now, which was not played, there's queen d8, king c6, queen d5. Nice double attack, very typical for these sort of positions. King e7 on the board, queen c7, king f6, queen f4, king e7, king c5. The king comes closer. There's another check. The rook got the block. Queen f6, rook e6, queen d4. You see it's taking a long time, but eventually we are forcing the king to go to the back rank. Queen h7, almost sort of zugzwang. Rook e7, queen g6, king f8, king c6. The king is getting closer and closer. e5, king d5. Finally, the pawn is coming forward, but it's not really gonna help. But now things are getting a little bit tricky. Just don't think that you have won the game here yet. Black in the game, Magnus played very precisely, but there are ways to go wrong. If you go king d6, rook d7 is there. And now you cannot take the pawn because of rook d6. This is a very nasty trap, sacrificing the rook for stalemate. Don't fall for that one. Instead, Magnus played king e5, rook g7. There's another little trap. You cannot take the pawn with your queen because of rook e7, and you win the queen. So instead there followed queen f6 check. That's very precise. The king got to keep the rook protected. Rook f7 was played, and now it's queen d8 check, king g7, and finally you win the pawn. Now we still have this endgame of queen versus rook. Rook got to go away, and now Magnus plays once again very precisely. Queen g5, king f8, and I really like his next move. This is something very difficult for most amateur players. He plays queen b5, going far away with the queen to attack the rook. But the main point is that if white is going to give a check now, you can safely oppose the enemy's king with the move king f6. There is no more check as the queen covers the f1 square. For instance, if rook e8 tried to go back to the back rank, you give a check, king g8, queen g5, king f8, and checkmate on g7. So now you understand what's the idea of this move. The rook got to stay on the f-file, and now it's queen to h5, hitting the rook on f7. If the rook goes back now, it's queen h8 with checkmate. Therefore, rook e7 was played with check, and now it's king f6. It's game over. The queen covers the f7 square. There's no rook f7 check. Queen h8 will otherwise be played. It's going to be checkmate in a few moves. So therefore, Jan Nepomniachtchi resigned on move 82. Just an incredible game. And once again, Magnus Carlsen wins a game in Dubai against Jan Nepomniachtchi. And it's very painful for Jan because in his career, he has never won a game in the World Championship match in Dubai and also in the Global Chess League. He has never won a game against Magnus Carlsen in a lot of attempts. So that's quite remarkable. And well, anyway, I think this was really good stuff. I hope you enjoyed it as well. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe to the channel, and we'll be back with more coverage of this fantastic event. See you soon.